Hey y'all, it's Sarah. I told you guys that I was kind of on this blue and white kick working on some pieces for my bestie. And if you've seen the other blue and white pieces already, you'll kind of get where these are going together as a coordinated set. I'm going to be using just some Readi-board brand foam core. If you're not familiar, this is found in your office supply, school supply section of places like Dollar Tree, Dollar General, Walmart. And all of it comes for $1 or less a sheet. These come in a 20 by 30 sheet. And I'm going to be cutting mine down to a 20 by 20 for this particular project. But the idea behind this project, I'm actually probably going to do several other smaller pieces. But mostly I just wanted to show you kind of the tile idea of this one. Also, I'm going to be using some pre-painted strips that I already had for my framing. If you have any questions about framing or painting, those are their own videos. That way you can really customize your crafts to what it is that you kind of want out of a look. So I leave that part up for interpretation there. So this one is pretty straightforward. My backer piece is going to be cut down to 20 by 20. I've got my strips. They'll eventually be cut down to 20 by 20. But I want to show you the really fun and exciting part. Now, you guys know that I am very, 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 very cautious about things that we can do to this surface to kind of keep it whole, to keep it from deteriorating and breaking down on us. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I've shown in other videos the construction of this material. It really is two see-through pieces of paper glued down to a thin sheet of foam. Now, part of the issue that I tend to make with that is that that glue that holds it down, the minute we start applying wet products, it soaks through that little thin piece of paper and can start breaking down the glue that holds that paper surface to the top. Now, if you follow along in the Peppermint Cactus group, you know that I said that there are certain exceptions. You know, I don't recommend going straight in with paint because it can be very hit or miss about whether or not it's going to soak in and cause a breakdown on your piece. Now, one thing about that I have found is that the smaller the piece that you cut out and paint, the less it seems to want to break down, warp, peel, and that kind of thing. I don't know why that is. I guess, you know, the larger it is, it dries uneven. I'm sure something to do with that effect. I'm going to be showing you something on some smaller pieces. We're going to be making our own tiles. Now, I've got just a whole stack of these. I don't even know how many is in this stack. I'm going to tell you how many it's going to take for this exact project that I'm showing you. But I'm going to be making lots of extras because, like I said, I was going to end up making some other pieces also. So these are cut in 4.5 by 4.5 squares. And you know, when you cut it down smaller, this stuff gets really strong, believe it or not. Now, the other thing that we're going to need for this is I'm going to be using this stencil right here from Dollar Tree. And I removed the top part. I know it was supposed to be to help almost work like a mask when you're using each little individual section. Because if you notice, each section has its own pattern. However, I ended up having an easier time just using it like this. So I'm going with this one. I know that they have a couple different varieties of these kind of multi-stencil pieces. This one just says assorted, so I'm not sure if the other ones have different names or they all just say assorted. This is the one I'm going to be using. Now, this is where it gets confusing because I tell you guys that I'm not a big fan of acrylic. We are using such a small amount of acrylic paint on such a small surface that this should not pose a problem. It's when you start working at a larger scale, large pieces, more moisture, that it really starts to show signs of breaking down. So far, I did at least 20 of these kind of faux tiles, and they've all held together. I tested out both directions with and without using the clear wax as a medium. It seems to hold up okay. Now, I can't promise that for everybody. We've had relatively nice weather. It's been pretty dry. On a more moist day, this might have failed on me. So keep that in mind. I'm not necessarily contradicting myself. There are exceptions. For some reason, on this smaller scale, it works out. I'm going to go ahead and bring in just a Dollar Tree dauber, and on this one, I ended up really liking using this dauber. I wasn't shooting for perfection on my little tiles. As a matter of fact, I really want them to look handcrafted. The color that I'm using is called Real Blue. You could also use Waverly's chalk paint in the color Ocean. It was a little softer in the blue tone. This had a little more brightness. The other thing that I think may have helped me on this is the fact that this is gloss, which means you can see I let a little of it dry here. It almost creates a plastic coating, and I think that's what it did when it dried on the surface. So it dries out with almost a plastic coating with that gloss in it that doesn't sink down into it like other paints can. And that's the same reason that our wax works the way that it does for us. So I think that kind of is what helped balance that out for me. I'm going to come in here with this really nice blue. If any of my fellow geeks are out there with me, this is absolutely almost a TARDIS blue. So I want to show you where I'm heading with this, and you guys can see, because I'm not going to sit and make all of these, but I want you to check this out. How cool are these? So a normal tile typically runs, I think, closer to a 4x4 on the square tiles like this. In order to fit this nicely, I went ahead and did a 4.5 by 4.5, but you could do a 4x4. It's just the 4.5. If you look, it really aligned with these patterns nicely. You could have done it smaller and just had your patterns actually come off the sides. This almost allows me to create a border if I line it up. And I did not go for perfection on this. I think I mentioned that. I want these to look like they're the hand-painted tiles. So all I'm going to do is come in, get my dauber kind of saturated. And I'm going to tap some of that off. And I'm not going to tap the whole thing like you typically would a stencil. Actually, this paper is absorbent. It's going to absorb this paint pretty quickly. So I'm just going to get some coverage on it. And then basically I tapped most of that paint off on there. And then I'm just kind of smushing the rest of it in. Doing this way, there is going to be a little bit of seepage. I was okay with that because I wanted that handcrafted look. If you wanted a little more perfected, you know, tape yours down. If you feel like you need those perfectly crisp lines, I'll let that one slide on me a little bit, but I'm going to go back in and do the same thing. And I'm not even going to load my dauber. And what this does, not loading it, is each one's going to have a slightly lighter, darker kind of blue, just like you would naturally see on this type of tile work. With the lighter and darker kind of varieties of blue. And it really is this simple. These held up well. Like I said, I speculate that that has to do with the fact that this paint is a gloss paint. And you surely can paint acrylic paints on foam core or poster board. But when we do that, that's usually made for like a temporary sign. Nobody really cares. You know, you might be putting a garage sale sign on it or whatever. Nobody really cares long term if that's going to hold up. But when I give you these precautions, it's more of me trying to help it last a little longer for you. So I'm just going to go around and do all the different patterns. The only pattern on here that I really didn't end up caring for the end results was this one right here, this kind of weave pattern. It ended up creating pretty much an almost all blue tile, so it didn't interest me as much as these other three patterns. And you can see I still have not loaded my dauber. And I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. I've got this whole stack because I knew I wanted to try to get several crafts done this way. I think they're awful cute. And you can see just how quickly that goes. So I actually have enough to do the one that I'm going to be showing you already. But I did want to show you the process that I used. And I think they turned out super adorable. And if you're into that blue and white look, this is such a nice substitute rather than trying to find the real tiles, which these I could simply hang across a wall very easily with just some poster putty and have these as a pop of color all the way across a wall. I just really like the idea and the concept. Hopefully you guys do too. So let me slide these out of the way. I'm going to make sure that I've got the drier ones since my background is going to be white and I tend to do things like that. I want to make sure that everything is really nice and dry. Okay, so I got most of the blue off my hand so it no longer looks like I choked a Smurf. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. I'm pretty sure that these guys are dry enough that I don't have to worry about accidentally transferring paint or fingerprints. My next step, and I kind of went into detail with this on the last video since these are easy crafts, and I want to do that again, or at least explain it pretty clearly again on our framing. So this entire sheet is cut at 20 inches this direction, 20 inches this direction. It is a full 20 inch by 20 inch. When I cut my frame pieces for this, no matter what the miter is going to be, I need to slide these over before I sling them off my desk. No matter what the miter is going to be, our strips are still going to be 20 inches by 20 inches. We are not trying to accommodate for any extra length. I know that gets confusing for people, but you're not accommodating for any extra length on your miter. It really is going to be the length and the width of whatever your overall finished project is supposed to be. So all I would do is measure all my pieces at 20 inches and cut them down. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. Okay, so I have all of mine aligned straight up 20 inches. I'm just going to cut them all at once. This is why I love these quilting rulers. They really make certain things easy. Okay, I got a good clean cut. You know you'll be seeing these on something else. And I want to show you this right quick like, because I know this one is honestly probably one of the topics that I get questions about the most is on the framing. And there is a video for that, and I'll try to make sure that it's linked at the bottom. So now you can see what I'm talking about. There is no extra added to this. We really are going at length and at width. So do our 45-degree miters. Now, you don't have to miter anything, guys. If that complicates it too much for you, you can always do the frames that just bump together. But for those of you that want to do the miters and get that clean mitered edge, this is for you guys. So I've got my smaller ruler simply because these are so much smaller pieces individually. It just makes it easier. Now, when it comes to my frame, whatever the width of my frame is, which is from here to here, whatever that width is what I'm going to be marking off. So this one right now is straight up 1 inch. I'm going to mark over 1 inch. If it was 1.5, I would mark over 1.5. So essentially what we need to mark out is a perfect square. So whatever your frame width is, you make a perfect square, if you guys can see that. When you go diagonal from corner to corner of that perfect square is how you get a 45-degree. So it's not going to matter what size your frame is. You're going to do this same thing every time. You'll just adjust it to that number, that width of your frame. The length part, I think, is the part that was confusing more people than not. On whether or not that long portion the long, more pointy portion of this ends up being longer than your piece, and it does not. And that's the part that gets confusing, is that actually stays the exact length of this. So the one thing I want to point out is that your point, your longer point, you want it the same on one edge of your piece, and then your shorter pieces are going to be on the other edge of that piece. And here we go, and you can see what I mean. Now you can see that's the longer ends, and nothing on the length of this ever changed. So that thing, the full length of it is still at 20 inches. So I feel like if I show this enough times, it'll make a little more sense. I know it gets a little confusing, and the only time that that may change is if you try to frame outside of your piece. But as long as you're framing directly on top of your piece, like this, you're going to attach your frames to the top of your piece, it's always going to be the full length of whatever your piece is. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my other framing pieces down. Okay, as you can see, all of my pieces are cut down. I did not lose a single bit of length on any of them. You can kind of see how their long edges still align. And if that looks a little confusing to you, just think of it this way. When they're spun around, you'll see how that matches up. Now, before I go to adhere these down, the next step that I'm going to take, I don't necessarily have to do this long edge. I can do that portion. I can hold off closer to the end so that I can do those at the same time. Or I want to make sure that I come in and do a little bit of this edge. So, one of the things that I want to show you is that when I miter, I always tend to go ahead and go in and paint. Because if you notice, you can see a little of that white right there. Now, I'm just taking my sponge, and you guys know that I store mine in a Ziploc bag, so mine always kind of stays moist. I'm just going to take that moist sponge and go ahead and touch that edge up. And now you can see that when they join, they're not going to have any white spots showing there. So one of the other steps that I want to do is this one, I end up with the white on the inside. I can't do that after the fact. I'm going to have to go ahead and do that edge now. But I want to show you something, and I did this in the last video, and I do this quite often. I don't necessarily show it, but if I am just going to do a layered piece like this that has all these framed out pieces, this one's going to be really thin. There's not a lot of thickness to the side to kind of hide any errors. I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to do this very carefully because we want to keep the rest of this white, and I do have a tendency to transfer fingerprints, but I'm going to go ahead and paint out these edges, and I'm going to come over just a hair. And don't worry, our framing strips are going to hide most of this. But when you only have those two little layers stacked, you really want to try to get that edge covered here on this part, because even if you try to paint those edges later, it's hard to get the paint to seep down in there. This is kind of same reason that when I stack the other pieces, I come in on those edges. If you notice, I'm more concerned right now about this upper portion than I am the sides, because I still always will go in at the very end and paint my sides a little more evenly, because sometimes you'll notice that that styrofoam absorbs the paint lighter in some spots of that foam and darker in others. So I usually still go back in at the very end and paint them again all at the same time so that their edge, each individual edge almost blends together with one another. And you can kind of see there, this edge is wanting to take it lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing this, and we're going to let it dry. Okie dokie, guys. I think my pieces have had plenty of time to dry. That way I'm not smudging and smearing any paints anywhere. And I want you to see just kind of how I did this. I know it's a little scary because there's basically paint smeared all over the edges, but we're doing that so that this is such a thin side piece that even just the slightest offset when you align your frame could show some of this white through. And normally when we layer our pieces, you see me do this on the edges of my pieces as we layer so that we don't have that happen. Since we're not layering a whole bunch of pieces, we're going to do that directly to our backer piece. Okay, all we've got to do next is take our 20 by 20 nicely mitered pieces and pop these things down into place. And I'm going to go all the way around. Now is a good time to go ahead and dry fit if you'd like. If you're still unsure about your mitering results, kind of dry fit them. Get them laid into place as you're going to glue them down. And know that, you know, as you're gluing, they're actually going to fit as you go around. Okay, here we go. I'm ready to get my last little piece popped into place. And as I glue these, I kind of like to run 2 lines of glue down, one closer to that long edge and one closer to that shorter edge, especially on the longer edge because that's the side that runs against the edge of our full piece. And we want that to adhere pretty much as tightly as we can to that bottom piece, not just for construction of this, but visually. It's better if you try to make sure there's no gaps in between where these two line up. That way it gives more to that illusion that it's one solid piece. And now you can kind of see, when I go to finish this piece, of course, you can see that I've got spots that are lighter and darker. I'll come in with my wet sponge, my paint saturated sponge, and kind of darken those at the same time. I don't want to do that right now because it goes back to not wanting to transfer paint. So that will be my very final step. I don't want to touch anything at this stage. And I'm going to bring some of my faux tiles back in. I'm going to spread them out and kind of look and see which one's the best ones. And I want to show you guys, look, I did not shoot for perfection on these. And anybody that knows me knows that I tend to be a little particular about certain things. But when I'm crafting, I do tend to be a little more forgiving. There are certain things that I can slide on, certain things that I can't. These, though, I really did want to go for that handcrafted, hand done, you know, that you bought these from a handcrafted tile company type place. So you can see kind of where we're going with this already. All I'm doing is I have 3 different patterns, which works out to do a 3x3 grid. That way I can kind of alternate my patterns. You can line them up any which way you want to. I'm just lining them to where there is kind of a rotation of my little different patterns here. And you can kind of see how this is working its way out. So this last section up here, it looks like, there we go. I trying to balance it visually. Now, a couple tips. I'm gonna kind of eyeball mine and glue them down, but I wanted to show you a couple tips on lining these up in a nice little grid and getting the spacing. And if you've ever done tile work for real or grout work or any of that, you know that it works out best if you have some kind of spacer to use in order to do that. I'm just going to grab a couple scraps here and show you that pretty much any little piece of scrap foam core can work. Just take you a couple little scraps and use those to kind of help bump all your little pieces together and get their alignment from top to bottom. If you need to sketch out kind of your framework, you can do that and just go back in and erase it later. If you do that, just keep in mind that white erasers don't tend to smear as bad on this white foam core as some of the colored erasers. I've had problems with the color ones smearing their color onto my foam core. So let's say the eraser was blue, I've gotten some of that blue smeared down. And I'm just going to switch this one out. So my suggestion is get your center one lined up in the center and glue all the ones outward from there. Or line up one single side. And since I said I'm just going to kind of eyeball mine into place, I am looking at a space of probably about, it looks like about 1 3/4 is going to be optimum. Actually, maybe 1 15/16. I hate those kind of really small measurements like that, but that is kind of what it ends up working out to be. The reason that I didn't go any bigger than 20 by 20 is the sheets only go 20 inches wide. So I would have gone in a much larger square. And if I was piecing the backer together, like we do with the shiplap look and that kind of thing, I could have done that and kind of pieced together and made myself a larger backer. But since I wanted this solid white backer, I was kind of limited at the 20 by 20. So I'm pretty sure that this is about where all of mine is going to line up. And I'm going to go ahead and start gluing some of these down. I want to just eyeball it and make sure that top and bottom I've got the same decent space. And I think I look pretty good here. We're just going to glue these down. And this is going to give... this gives us some nice dimension on this piece, even though it still is a fairly flat, lightweight piece. These tiles kind of give a little bit of dimension on that. When you're looking at them at this point of view, they really do look like real tiles that have been adhered down to this piece. And this is really kind of all there is to this one. I love this look. And I love these little tile pieces. I see me having a little more fun with playing with them, especially with that stencil. That stencil was a really great way to get this look. If blue is not your thing, do it in gray. Do it in black and white. You guys... If you've been following me for a while, you've seen where I did the slightly kind of larger version of the black and white tile out of vinyl that kind of looks like a mandala. This is just an alternative to that. So, without making this any longer than necessary, I hope it gives you some ideas. I hope it teaches you a little something. Like I said, I am very particular about what I say to use or what I suggest to use, just because I want to give you guys as much longevity as you can out of these pieces. And typically I would not use this method on anything large. I would not go directly painted on it. Something like this with a small lightweight pattern, you probably could do something large and it would be okay. But when you start getting a whole lot of coverage on a whole lot of the foam core, you start facing a whole lot of breakdown of your pieces too. So keep that in mind. It's not that that I'm switching attitudes on how to do the foam core. It's just certain pieces seem to hold up better to certain scenarios. It is a very fickle kind of product to play with, although you have to admit that it does give a lot of creative freedom. It may not be as durable as wood, but it absolutely gives a lot of creative freedom. You just kind of have to know the pros and cons and how far you can push it in one aspect and where you really need to pull back in and take precaution in other aspects. So I hope you at least learned something, picked up a tip, learned all the things you don't want to do, whatever way that goes. You know, I'm not going to get my feelings hurt either way. It's more of putting the information out there and letting you guys do with it what you do with it. Hopefully it gets you sparked for a little creativity, even if it's not for this craft. There are always, I think, ideas in any craft, even if it's not your style, not your vibe. There's still always ideas that I think are beneficial no matter what. So hopefully you got something beneficial out of this. I hope you guys get a chance to do a little crafting this weekend. I'm certainly going to be doing a lot more crafting and playing with this idea. I had zero intentions of making any of this for myself. I do not actually decorate with a lot of color. I keep things neutral and just add color in, usually kind of with my seasonal decor. However, I have been really drawn to blue. And yet I tend to refuse to want to commit. After making the first set of these for my friend, I plan on making a set for myself. I feel like it's a good way for me to test if I am ready for color in my household, and without a whole lot of guilt. This was probably maybe, I did not do the math on this, guys. I don't tend to do my foam core math because I usually have so many pieces pre-cut or what have you, but at the most 3 sheets. I think it's only more like 2 sheets of foam core. And then your paint supplies, which most of us already have on hand now at this point. So this is a really good way for me to kind of test my dedication to a color and not feel guilty if I decide 3 weeks later that I am, in fact, not ready for color on my walls. So hopefully that'll, you know, be something that you can think about, that if you want to jump in and play with a trend, but not want to commit entirely. This is such a fun way to be able to play with those trends without a lot of commitment financially or anything else. So I'm going to finish this. I hope you get a chance to craft, and I'm going to holler at y'all soon. Bye, guys.